Shadow didn't bark at the scent of salt. He barked at the scent of blood. Maya Stone, a retired Navy SEAL, watched her K-9 lunge toward a listing trawler in the Maine fog, discovering FBI Special Agent Liam Vance bound and bleeding out. This wasn't a rescue. It was an intersection of two hunted lives. Before the night ends, Maya will realize the man she saved is the same man who sent her team into a death trap years ago. Subscribe to the channel to witness this pulse-pounding saga of betrayal and justice. Comment below with your city so I can see how far our story travels. The fog was a suffocating gray shroud that swallowed the jagged edges of the Maine coastline, turning the Atlantic into a silent, breathing beast. Maya Stone gripped the leash of her Belgian Malinois, Shadow, feeling the dog's muscles vibrate with a sudden, sharp tension. She wasn't just a civilian walking her dog. The way she balanced her weight and scanned the horizon was a ghost of the tactical precision she had once lived by. "What is it, boy?" Maya whispered. Her voice was low, a serrated edge in the damp air. Shadow didn't whine. He let out a single guttural huff, his ears swiveling toward an old, rusted trawler groaning against the pier. The smell of diesel was thick, but beneath it, Maya's internal alarm, the one that had kept her alive in Kandahar, began to scream. She dropped the leash, giving Shadow the silent hand signal to scout. The dog moved like a phantom, disappearing into the mist toward the ship's gangplank. Maya followed, her hand instinctively reaching for the small of her back, where her sidearm sat cold against her skin. She reached the deck and heard a muffled, rhythmic thumping from below. It wasn't the engine. It was a human struggle. "Shadow, hold!" she commanded as she breached the hatch. Below deck, the air was stagnant. In the corner of a cramped, rusted hold, a man was chained to a structural pipe. His face was a map of bruises, his white shirt soaked in crimson. Beside him stood a figure in a dark raincoat, holding a silenced pistol to the man's temple. "Drop it!" Maya roared, her weapon leveled before the killer could blink. "Hands where I can see them, or you don't leave this boat." The killer didn't panic. He looked at Maya, then at the dog snarling at his throat, and made a choice. He fired a wild shot that ricocheted off the hull and dove through a porthole into the freezing black water. Maya didn't chase him. She lunged for the prisoner, whose eyes were rolling back in his head. "Hey, stay with me!" she shouted, ripping a shard of metal from the floor to pick the lock on his cuffs. "Who are you? Who was that?" The man coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Liam Vance. FBI. They're coming back to finish the job." Maya froze. The name Liam Vance struck her like a physical blow. It was the name on the redacted reports she had spent 3 years trying to decode. The agent who had authorized the botched raid that wiped out her entire SEAL platoon. She stared at him, her fingers hovering over his pulse. This was the man who had ruined her life, and now she was the only thing standing between him and a shallow grave. "Vance?" Maya's voice was a hiss of disbelief. "You're Vance. Help me," he wheezed, totally oblivious to the hatred burning in her eyes. "The files, the drive, it's still in the office. They're purging everything." Shadow let out a sharp, warning bark. Heavy boots were hitting the deck above them, multiple contacts. The killer hadn't run. He had called for backup. Maya looked at the dying man, and then at the hatch. Every instinct told her to leave him for the sharks, to let the man responsible for her trauma face his own. But the seal code didn't have an "except for him" clause. "Shadow guard!" she snapped. She grabbed Vance under the arms, gritting her teeth as she hauled his dead weight toward the back emergency exit. "You're saving me?" Vance managed to mutter as they scrambled through a narrow maintenance tunnel. "Why?" "I'm not saving you for your sake," Maya growled, her breath hitching as they burst out into the cold sea air on the far side of the pier. "I'm saving you so you can stand trial for what you did to my team. You don't get the easy way out." They reached her rugged SUV just as a black sedan roared onto the pier, headlights cutting through the fog like predatory eyes. Maya shoved Vance into the back seat and vaulted into the driver's side. Shadow jumped into the passenger seat, his head swiveling to track the men emerging from the sedan with submachine guns. "Down!" Maya yelled, throwing the car into reverse. Bullets shattered the rear window, glass raining down on Vance. Maya floored it, Chuta, the tires screaming as she drifted around a stack of shipping containers. She wasn't driving like a civilian. She was executing a high-speed extraction. She tore through the shipyard, weaving between rusted machinery until she hit the coastal highway. "Check the dog's collar," Vance gasped from the floorboards, his voice weakening. "Maya, look at the collar." Maya glanced at Shadow. The dog was staring at Vance, but then he began to paw at his own heavy tactical collar. She reached over, her fingers finding a small, hard lump stitched into the leather. She ripped the stitching open. A micro SD drive fell into her palm. "What is this?" she demanded. "The names," Vance whispered. "The ones who actually ordered the hit on your team. It wasn't me, Maya. I was set up just like you were. That drive, it's the only reason I'm alive, or dead." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. If Vance was telling the truth, the betrayal went deeper than a single agent. It went all the way to the top of the bureau. She looked in the rearview mirror. The black sedan was still there, gaining on them. They weren't just hitmen. They were a professional intercept team. "We need to get to the safe house," Maya said, her mind racing. "But they'll be tracking your phone." "I threw it. In the harbor," Vance said, his eyes closing. "Maya, don't trust anyone, not even your own people." Suddenly, the black sedan pulled alongside them. A man leaned out of the window with a specialized launcher. A metallic clack echoed, and a GPS tracker slammed into the side of Maya's SUV. "Great," Maya muttered, jerking the wheel to the right. She drove off the main road, crashing through a wooden fence and into the dense Maine woods. The SUV jolted violently as she navigated the uneven terrain, the branches clawing at the paint. She killed the lights, relying on her night vision augmented memory of the local trails. She stopped the car in a hollow beneath a canopy of pines. Silence descended, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and Vance's ragged breathing. Shadow stayed perfectly still, his nose twitching. "They're going to find us," Maya whispered, looking at the drive in her hand. "If this is a lie, Vance, I will kill you myself." She turned to look at him, but Vance was unconscious. She reached out to check his wound, but Shadow let out a low, vibrating growl, not at Vance, but at the woods behind them. Maya looked out the window. A faint red laser dot was dancing across the dashboard. "Get out! Now!" Maya screamed, grabbing Vance's collar and dragging him out of the car just as a shoulder-fired missile impacted the SUV's engine block. The explosion threw them into the dirt. The heat was a wall of orange flame that momentarily blinded the night. Maya scrambled to her feet, her ears ringing. She saw Shadow standing over Vance, the dog's fur singed, but his stance unwavering. Through the smoke, 3 figures in tactical gear emerged, their night vision goggles glowing like green eyes. "Stone, give us the drive and the agent," the lead man called out. His voice was familiar. It was Miller, the man who had been her instructor at the SEAL training center. The profound twist felt like ice in her veins. Her mentor, the man who taught her everything about honor and survival, was the one leading the assassination squad. Miller? Maya's voice was a whisper of heartbreak. "You're part of this?" "It's bigger than us, Maya," Miller said, raising his rifle. "Don't make me kill my best student for a man who doesn't deserve to breathe." Maya looked at Vance, then at Shadow, and then at the drive. She realized then that she wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for the truth of her past. She gripped her pistol, her eyes hardening into the cold steel of a warrior who had nothing left to lose. "You taught me never to surrender, Miller!" Maya shouted back, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Did you forget that part?" She fired, the muzzle flash lighting up the forest. Shadow lunged into the darkness, a blur of teeth and fury. The war hadn't ended in the desert. It had just followed her home. Maya grabbed Vance's arm and retreated into the black heart of the woods, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them like a countdown to an ending she wasn't ready to face. The heat from the exploding SUV was a violent roar that momentarily deafened Maya, but she didn't let the shock paralyze her. She grabbed Liam by the back of his tactical vest, dragging his semi-conscious body into the dense undergrowth of the main woods. Shadow was already ahead, a silent blur of fur and muscle navigating the shadows. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from the raw, cold calculation of a survivor. Miller was out there. Her mentor, the man who had taught her how to disappear, was now the one hunting her. "Can you walk?" Maya hissed, pinning Liam against the rough bark of a pine tree. Liam coughed, a wet, ragged sound that made Maya wince. "I don't have a choice, do I?" "No, you don't. Move." They pushed deeper into the darkness. The only sound, the rhythmic crunch of snow and the distant mechanical hum of a drone. Maya felt a surge of bitterness. She had spent years mourning her team, blaming a nameless bureau face, she's only to find him bleeding in her back seat, while her hero turned into her executioner. Every few yards, Shadow would stop, his ears swiveling. The dog wasn't just scouting. He was sensing the electronic perimeter Miller's team was surely dropping. "Wait!" Liam gasped, stumbling over a frozen root. He grabbed Maya's arm, his grip desperate. "The drive. In the collar. If they get close enough, they can trigger a remote wipe. It's encrypted with a proximity failsafe." Maya stopped dead. She looked at Shadow, then at the small micro SD card, now tucked into her inner pocket. "You're telling me this now? If they get within 100 yards, all this was for nothing?" "It's how they protect the high-level assets," Liam whispered, his face pale in the moonlight. "Miller doesn't want to just kill us. He wants to erase the evidence before he does." A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the direction of the road, a flashbang. Miller was flushing the perimeter. Maya didn't hesitate. She threw Liam over her shoulder in a fireman's carry, ignoring the searing pain in her own back from the earlier blast. She ran. She didn't follow the trails. She moved toward the Devil's Throat, a jagged ravine where the limestone cliffs would interfere with the drone's thermal sensors. "Shadow, flank," she commanded. The dog veered left, intentionally making noise to draw the thermal signatures away from the cliffside. As they reached the edge of the ravine, a red laser dot danced across Maya's boot. A sniper. She dove forward, tumbling with Liam down a steep, icy embankment. They crashed into a shallow cave hidden by frozen vines. Maya scrambled up, her pistol leveled at the opening, her breath coming in jagged gasps. "Did they see us?" Liam wheezed, clutching his side. "Doesn't matter," Maya snapped. "They know the terrain. Miller knows I'd head for the limestone." She looked at Liam, really looked at him, seeing the genuine terror in his eyes. The anger she felt for the botched raid in Kandahar was still there, but it was being eclipsed by a darker truth. Why would Miller do this? He's a SEAL. He's supposed to be about honor. Liam let out a hollow, bitter laugh. "Honor doesn't pay for a private island in the Caymans, Maya. The raid on your team wasn't a mistake. It was a distraction. Your platoon was the smokescreen for a massive arms shipment moving through the northern corridor. Miller wasn't your mentor. He was the logistics officer for the cartel the Bureau was supposedly fighting." The revelation hit Maya harder than any bullet. Her friends hadn't died because of a clerical error or a bad lead. They had been sacrificed like pawns to clear a path for profit. The man who had sat at her kitchen table drinking coffee and telling her stories of brotherhood had signed their death warrants. "I'm going to kill him," Maya whispered, her voice devoid of emotion. "You won't get the chance." A calm, an amplified voice boomed from the woods above the cave. "Maya, I know you're in there. I can see your CO2 signature through the vents. Send Vance out with the drive, and I'll give you a 5-minute head start. For old time's sake." Maya gripped her weapon, her knuckles white. "Go to hell, Miller." "Always the stubborn one," Miller's voice sighed. "Team 2, breach the rear. Use the gas." Maya's eyes widened. She hadn't realized the cave had a secondary entrance. She grabbed her tactical mask from her belt, shoving it onto Liam's face. "Breathe slow. Don't move." A canister hissed as it rolled into the back of the cave, spewing thick, yellowish smoke. Maya didn't wait for them to enter. She whistled, a high, sharp note. Shadow burst through the front opening, not running away, but lunging directly at the silhouette of the first man appearing in the mist. The sound of snarling and panicked shouting filled the small space. Maya moved with the lethal fluidity of a ghost. She emerged from the smoke, her suppressed pistol barking twice. 2 men fell. She grabbed a fallen radio, clicking it onto the command frequency. "Miller, you taught me that a SEAL never leaves a man behind," Maya said into the mic, her voice cold and steady. "But you forgot the most important rule. We never forget a face." She didn't wait for a reply. She grabbed Liam and pushed him through the thicket, moving toward the old lighthouse on the point. It was a death trap, a dead end with the ocean at its back, but it was the only place with a high-frequency transmitter. If she could get the data on that drive to the cloud, Miller's wipe wouldn't matter. "We can't make it," Liam stumbled, his legs giving out. "Maya, take the drive. Leave me. I'm the one they want." "Shut up," Maya growled, hauling him upright. "You're my witness. You're going to tell the world what he did." They reached the base of the lighthouse, the wind whipping the spray of the Atlantic into their faces. The iron door was rusted shut, but Maya used a localized explosive charge to blow the hinges. They scrambled inside, the spiral staircase looming above them like a spine of rusted metal. Shadow stood at the entrance, his fur bristling, his eyes locked on the woods, He wasn't barking anymore. He was waiting. "Get to the top," Maya commanded Liam. "Find the emergency radio. The encryption key is 77 Zulu. Upload everything." As Liam began the grueling climb, Maya turned back to the door. She saw the flashlights. They were coming in a semicircle, a classic pincer movement. But then, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Miller wasn't with them. He was already on the cliffs, looking down at them through a long-range thermal scope. "Shadow, stay," Maya whispered, kneeling beside the dog. She felt the warmth of his body, the only thing in this world that felt honest. "If I don't make it out of this, you protect him. You hear me? Protect the truth." Shadow licked her hand once, a quick sandpaper rough gesture of loyalty, and then turned back to the darkness. The first tactical team reached the threshold. Maya didn't fire. She waited until they were inside the narrow kill zone of the entryway. Then, she pulled the pin on a flashbang she'd rigged to the doorframe. The world turned white. In the confusion, Maya lunged forward, her knife gleaming in the strobing light. She wasn't a victim. She was a predator in her own element. She took down 3 men in the span of 10 seconds, her movements a blur of practiced violence. But as she reached for the 4th, a heavy boot slammed into her ribs, sending her sprawling across the stone floor. "End of the line, Stone," Miller said, stepping through the doorway. He wasn't wearing a mask. When he looked exactly the same as the day he'd seen her off at the airport, calm, paternal, and utterly soulless. He leveled his rifle at her head. "Give me the drive, and I'll make sure the dog lives. That's the best deal you're going to get." Maya looked up at him, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. She smiled. It was a dark, dangerous expression. "You're too late, Miller." From high above, a faint, rhythmic pulsing sound began to echo, the sound of data being beamed to a satellite. The lighthouse's ancient beacon flickered to life for a split second, a signal of a successful upload. Miller's face contorted in rage. "You bitch!" He pulled the trigger. But before the hammer could fall, a golden black streak launched from the shadows. Shadow didn't go for the arm. He went for the throat. The force of the K9's impact sent Miller crashing backward out of the lighthouse and toward the jagged rocks of the cliffside. Maya scrambled to the door, her heart in her throat. "Shadow!" "No!" She reached the edge just in time to see the 2 figures disappear into the white mist of the crashing waves below. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the mournful cry of the wind and the distant sirens of the Coast Guard finally responding to the distress signal. Maya collapsed on the wet stone, her hand reaching out into the empty air, the weight of the past finally, agonizingly, crashing down on her. She sat there in the dark, the data successfully sent, the killer gone, but the cost was more than she could bear. She stared at the churning black water, waiting for a sign, a splash, anything. "Please," she whispered to the void. "Not him. Not again." The sirens grew louder, and the first light of dawn began to bleed through the fog. But for Maya Stone, the world remained plunged in a freezing, hollow gray. She had saved the agent. She had exposed the killer. But as she looked at the empty leash in her hand, she realized the war had taken one last thing from her, the only heart that had never lied to her. The salt spray stung Maya's eyes, but she refused to blink, staring into the churning abyss where Shadow and Miller had vanished. Behind her, the lighthouse transmitter hummed with a dying mechanical whir, having finished the upload that would destroy Miller's empire. but the victory felt like ashes in her mouth. She scrambled to the edge of the wet, jagged cliff, her fingers clawing at the icy rock. "Shadow!" she screamed, her voice breaking against the roar of the Atlantic. There was no bark, no splash, only the indifferent white foam of the waves crashing against the stone. "Maya, we have to move!" Liam shouted from the gallery above, his voice strained and thin. "The Coast Guard is 5 minutes out, but Miller's second team is already at the base of the stairs. They don't know the data is gone yet." Maya didn't move. Her heart felt like it had been ripped out and tossed into that freezing water. She looked at the empty space where her partner had just been, the dog who had survived the desert, the dog who had been her only link to her fallen brothers. Then, a dark shape broke the surface of the water 50 feet out. It wasn't a person. It was a rhythmic, desperate splashing. "He's alive!" Maya gasped, her adrenaline surging with a violent, renewed heat. She saw Shadow's head bobbing in the swells, Chicha struggling against the riptide. But Miller was nowhere to be seen. The ocean had claimed the predator, but the protector was still fighting. A bullet sparked off the iron railing inches from Maya's head. Miller's backup had breached the interior. The tactical team was pouring out onto the catwalk. Maya dove behind a rusted winch, her pistol leveled. "Liam, get to the winch. There's an old cargo line." "I can't reach it," Liam yelled back, dodging a burst of submachine gun fire that shattered the lighthouse glass. "Do it now, or we die in this tower," Maya roared. She popped up, firing 2 precise shots that dropped the lead mercenary in the doorway. She didn't feel like a victim anymore. She was a SEAL in a kill zone. She grabbed a flare gun from the emergency locker and fired it directly into the narrow stairwell. The magnesium glare blinded the attackers, their screams echoing up the stone shaft. In that moment of chaos, Maya looked back at the water. Shadow was closer, but he was weakening. His movements were becoming erratic. He was losing the battle against the cold. Maya gripped the cargo cable, a thick, rusted steel line used for hauling supplies from boats. She looped it around her waist and looked at Liam. "Lower me, now." "You're insane! You'll hit the rocks!" Liam scrambled to the crank, his face pale. "Drop me or I'll jump without the line." Liam threw the brake. Maya descended rapidly, the wind whipping her hair into a frenzy as she plummeted toward the churning surf. The mercenaries recovered from the flare and began firing down at her. Bullets hissed into the water like angry hornets. Maya kicked off the cliff face, swinging herself outward, her eyes locked on the sable and black fur struggling in the waves. She hit the water with a bone-jarring impact, the cold instantly seizing her lungs. She swam with a desperation she hadn't felt since the raid in Kandahar. "Shadow! Here!" The dog turned, his eyes glazed with exhaustion, and let out a soft, submerged whimper. Maya grabbed his tactical vest, hauling his heavy, sodden body toward her. He was freezing, his heartbeat a frantic, irregular drum against her chest. She clipped his harness to her own. "I've got you, buddy. I've got you." The cable jerked. Liam was pulling them up, but the winch was old and groaning under the double weight. Above them, the mercenaries realized what was happening. One of them leaned over the railing, aiming his rifle directly at Maya's head. "Goodbye, Commander." The man sneered. A sudden, deafening roar drowned out the wind. A high-intensity searchlight bathed the entire cliffside in a clinical white glare. A Coast Guard Jayhawk helicopter descended from the clouds, its rotor wash flattening the waves into a chaotic mist. The door gunner didn't hesitate, pinning the mercenaries down with a flurry of warning shots. This is the United States Coast Guard. Drop your weapons and move away from the ledge. The loudspeaker boomed. Maya felt the cable lift them higher. She scrambled over the railing of the lower gallery, collapsing onto the wet metal with Shadow in her arms. Liam was there, his hands bloody from the winch crank, his face streaked with tears and salt. They lay there for a moment, 3 broken people in a broken world, as the tactical teams above were swarmed by federal reinforcements. "The drive," Liam whispered, checking his watch. The upload hit the main bureau server. "It's over, Maya. They're arresting the director as we speak." Maya didn't care about the director. She buried her face in Shadow's wet fur, feeling the dog's breath finally stabilize. "You're okay," she sobbed. "You're okay." But as the Coast Guard medics rappelled down to the gallery, Shadow let out a low, sharp growl. He wasn't looking at the medics. He was looking at Liam. Maya frowned, her hand sliding to her hidden knife. "Shadow, what is it?" "It's Liam. He's with us." Shadow didn't stop. He bared his teeth, his hackles rising as he stared at Liam's jacket pocket. Liam froze, his expression shifting from relief to a cold, calculated mask that Maya recognized instantly. It was the look of a man who had one last card to play. "Liam?" Maya asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous, low hum. "What's in your pocket?" "Maya, don't," Liam said softly, stepping back toward the edge of the gallery. "You saved me. You did your job. Just let it go." "Show me your hands, Liam." Liam slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a second micro SD card, one he hadn't mentioned. "The drive we uploaded was the evidence against Miller. This is the evidence against the people who hired Miller. The people who are currently rescuing us." The profound twist hit Maya like a secondary explosion. The Coast Guard, the federal reinforcements, they weren't there to save them. They were there to secure the second drive. The director was the fall guy, but the real power was still in the air, hovering right above them. "They're not here for justice, Maya," Liam said, his voice trembling. "They're here for the cleanup. If I give them this, we live. If I don't, this helicopter isn't taking us to a hospital. It's taking us to the bottom of the ocean." Maya looked up at the Jayhawk. The door gunner wasn't looking at the mercenaries anymore. He was looking at her. The searchlight felt less like a beacon, and New Hon like a target. "Give it to me," Maya said, extending her hand. "Maya, if you take this, you're the most wanted woman in the country," Liam warned. "I've been dead for 3 years, Liam," Maya snapped, her eyes burning with a fierce, unbreakable light. "I might as well start acting like it." She grabbed the drive just as the first medic hit the deck. Shadow lunged, blocking the medic's path, giving Maya the split second she needed. She didn't head for the chopper. She headed for the lighthouse's old service chute, a narrow, vertical tunnel that led directly to the sea caves at the base of the cliff. "Liam, jump!" she yelled. They dove into the darkness just as the first rounds of friendly fire tore into the metal gallery. They tumbled through the chute, hitting a secondary pool of freezing water inside the cavern. The sound of the helicopter faded, replaced by the rhythmic booming thud of the tide. Maya surfaced, she holding Shadow's head above water. They were in a cathedral of stone, the only light coming from the bioluminescent algae on the walls. Liam surfaced next to them, gasping for air. "They'll have divers in the water in minutes," Liam said, his teeth chattering. "Let them come," Maya said, her voice echoing off the limestone. She looked at the drive in her hand. the true list of the architects of her team's demise. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was the witness, the judge, and the executioner. She looked at Shadow, who shook the water off his coat and stood tall in the shallow surf, his eyes reflecting the dim, ghostly light. "We're not running anymore, Shadow," Maya whispered. The hunt had changed. The girl who had been walking her dog in the fog was gone. In her place stood a Navy SEAL who had just discovered that the only way to find peace was to burn the corruption to the ground. She tucked the drive into Shadow's collar, the same place the first one had been hidden. The cycle was complete, but the war was just beginning. As the sound of splashing oars echoed from the cave entrance, Maya drew her blade, the steel catching a stray glint of moonlight. The hunters were coming, but they didn't realize they had just stepped into the lion's den. The water in the sea cave was a freezing, rhythmic pulse that threatened to pull the remaining warmth from Maya's bones. But she didn't let the numbness win. She dragged herself onto a slick limestone ledge, hauling Shadow up by his harness, while Liam scrambled beside them, his breath coming in ragged, panicked bursts. Above them, the muffled thump-thump-thump of the Jayhawk's rotors vibrated through the rock, a mechanical predator circling a prey it had lost in the dark. Maya didn't look at the entrance. She looked at the second drive in her hand, the weight of it feeling heavier than any weapon she had ever carried. "They're coming down, Maya," Liam whispered, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely form the words. "The divers, they'll have high-intensity underwater lights. We're trapped in a bottle." Maya didn't answer. She reached into her tactical vest and pulled out a small, waterproof GPS jammer she'd kept as a relic from her final tour. She clicked it on, the faint blue light reflecting in Shadow's alert, dark eyes. "If they want to find us, they're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way, stuck in the dark." Shadow let out a low, vibrating growl, his head turning toward the back of the cavern where the water narrowed into a dark, jagged slit in the rock. Maya followed his gaze. There was a draft, a steady, salt-tinged breeze coming from deep within the cliff. It wasn't a dead end. "Move!" she commanded, grabbing Liam's collar. They waded into the waist-deep water, the darkness absolute except for the ghostly bioluminescence clinging to the walls. Every splash felt like a gunshot in the silence. Suddenly, the cave behind them erupted in a blinding, artificial glare. The divers had entered. The beams of their underwater torches cut through the water like white swords, searching for the shadows they were supposed to eliminate. "They're here!" Liam panicked, trying to surge forward, but Maya held him back, her hand clamped over his mouth. "Quiet," she hissed. She watched the lights. They weren't moving like rescue divers. They were moving in a tactical sweep, weapons drawn. These weren't Coast Guard. They were the Black Bag Team, the cleaners sent to ensure the second drive never reached the light of day. Maya waited until the lead diver turned his back. Then she slipped underwater, moving like a shadow. She surfaced behind him, her knife finding the seal of his dry suit. The hiss of escaping air was the only warning he got before she pulled him under. It was a silent, brutal neutralization. She didn't kill him, but she took his oxygen and his radio. She surfaced next to Liam, handing him the diver's mask. "Breathe. We're going through the submerged tunnel." "I can't swim that far," Liam protested, his eyes wide with terror. "You can, or you can stay here and explain to them why you have that drive," Maya snapped. She didn't wait for his consent. She grabbed Shadow's harness and dove. The tunnel was a tight, suffocating squeeze, the rock scraping against her gear, but she pushed through, her lungs screaming for air. She felt Shadow's powerful kicks beside her, the dog's instinct for survival guiding them through the lightless passage. They surfaced in a secondary chamber, a hidden grotto that smelled of old wood and rot. Maya hauled herself up and froze. In the center of the grotto sat an old, semi-submerged smuggling vessel from the Prohibition era, its hull encrusted with barnacles, but its frame still intact. And sitting on the deck, waiting with a flare gun in his hand, Chuck was a man Maya thought she'd never see again. Her old commanding officer, Captain Reed. "You took your time, Stone," Reed said, his voice a gravelly rumble that echoed off the stone walls. The profound twist hit Maya like a physical blow to the chest. Reed was supposed to be in D.C., testifying at a hearing. He wasn't supposed to be in a sea cave in Maine. "Captain?" Maya gasped, her weapon half raised. "What are you doing here?" "I'm the one who gave Vance the drive, Maya," Reed said, stepping into the dim light. "The first drive was to catch Miller. This one is to catch the man who gave Miller his orders. The man you've been working for tonight without even knowing it." Maya looked at Liam, then back at Reed. "You mean the director?" "No," Reed said, a grim smile touching his lips. "I mean the man currently sitting in the Jayhawk above us. The Secretary of Defense." The revelation turned the world upside down. The betrayal didn't just go to the top of the Bureau, it went to the very top of the military chain of command. Her own commander-in-chief's inner circle had sanctioned the hit on her team. "He's coming down himself, Maya," Reed warned, checking his watch. "He thinks he's here to supervise the recovery. He doesn't know I've already authorized a secondary extraction team from the 75th Rangers. But they're 20 minutes out. We just have to hold this boat." 20 minutes? Liam whispered, looking at the dark water where the divers were still searching. "They'll find us in 5. Then we make those 5 minutes the longest of their lives," Maya said, her voice hardening into the cold, lethal mask of a seal. She turned to Shadow. "Shadow, find a perch. Guard the rear." The dog scrambled onto the rotted deck of the smuggling boat, his eyes fixed on the tunnel. Maya and Reed took positions behind the rusted engine block, their weapons aimed at the water. The silence returned, but it was heavy now, pregnant with the coming violence. The first light appeared in the tunnel, then the second. But they didn't come from underwater. They came from the ceiling. The cleaners were rappelling through the blowholes in the cliff. "Above us!" Maya shouted, opening fire. The grotto erupted into a chaotic symphony of muzzle flashes and ricochets. Maya moved with a desperate, fluid speed, her rifle barking as she picked off the repelling attackers. Beside her, Reed was a steady, immovable force, his shots clinical and precise. But there were too many of them. A grenade bounced across the deck, exploding near the hull and sending a shower of splinters into Maya's shoulder. She fell back, her vision blurring. "Shadow!" The dog launched himself from the deck, catching an attacker mid-air as he descended. The man's scream was cut short as they hit the water together. Shadow didn't let go, dragging the man into the depths. Maya scrambled to her feet, ignoring the blood soaking through her jacket. She saw Liam huddled in the corner, clutching the drive to his chest as if it were a shield. "Give it to me, Liam!" she roared over the gunfire. He threw the drive. Maya caught it and turned to the captain. "Reed, get him to the back of the boat. I'll draw them off." "Stone! That's a suicide run!" Reed yelled. "It's the only run we've got." Maya didn't wait for an argument. She grabbed a handful of flares and ignited them all at Motluk, she throwing them toward the center of the grotto. The space turned into a blinding, crimson nightmare of smoke and fire. She ran toward the secondary tunnel, her boots splashing through the water, making as much noise as possible. The attackers followed. They wanted the drive, and they wanted her. She led them into a narrow, twisting corridor of stone, her mind replaying the maps Reed had shown her years ago. She reached a dead end, a sheer wall of rock with no exit. She turned, her back to the wall. Her last magazine clicked into place. The lead attacker stepped into the light, his mask reflecting the red glow of the flares. He raised his weapon. "Drop it, Stone. There's nowhere left to run." Maya didn't drop it. She looked him in the eye and pulled the trigger. The man fell, but the three behind him opened fire. Maya felt a sharp, searing pain in her side, and she collapsed against the rock. The drive slid from her hand, skittering across the wet floor toward the boots of the remaining killers. One of them reached down to pick it up, a triumphant laugh echoing in his throat. But before his fingers could touch the plastic, a sable and black blur slammed into him. Shadow hadn't stayed with Reed. He had followed her. He stood over the drive, his teeth bared, a low, terrifying roar vibrating in his chest. "Kill the dog!" the man yelled. Maya watched in slow motion as the men leveled their rifles at her partner. She tried to reach for her weapon, but her limbs felt like lead. This was it, the end of the line. But then, the entire cave shook with a sound like the earth itself was cracking open. A massive, high-pressure water jet erupted from the wall behind Maya, the sheer force of it throwing the attackers off their feet. The tide had turned, and the blowhole effect she had been counting on had finally triggered. The grotto was flooding with the force of a tidal wave. Maya grabbed Shadow's collar as the water swept them up, carrying them back toward the main chamber. She saw Reed and Liam clinging to the smuggling boat, which was now floating in the surging tide. She reached out, her fingers catching the railing, and Reed hauled them both aboard. "The Rangers are here!" Reed shouted, pointing to the ceiling. A dozen figures in tan berets were fast roping through the holes, their suppressors spitting lead into the remaining cleaners. The secretary's team was being systematically dismantled. Maya lay on the deck, the water swirling around her, her hand locked on Shadow's neck. She looked at the drive, still clutched in her other hand, dripping with salt water but intact. She looked up at the light coming from the cliff top, her breath hitching in her chest. "We did it," Liam whispered, collapsing next to her. Maya didn't answer. She felt the cold, the pain, and the overwhelming weight of the truth she was holding. She looked at Shadow, who was shivering but alive, his eyes never leaving hers. They had exposed the killer. They had survived the betrayal, but she knew the world they were going back to would never be the same. The secretary was still in the air, but the ground beneath him had just dissolved. Maya closed her eyes as the Rangers surrounded the boat. The sound of the ocean finally turning from a threat into a lullaby. She had saved the agent. She had saved herself. And as she felt Shadow's wet muzzle touch her cheek, she realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't a ghost. She was a woman who had finally come home. The transition from the freezing chaos of the sea cave to the clinical, humming interior of the Ranger transport felt like a shift between two different dimensions. Maya sat on the cold metal bench, her hand still locked onto Shadow's tactical harness, as if the dog were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. Across from her, Liam clutched the second drive, his knuckles white, his eyes darting toward the rangers who were securing the grotto's perimeter with professional, silent efficiency. Captain Reed stood by the rear hatch, his silhouette a jagged shadow against the moonlight filtering through the blowholes above. "We aren't in the clear yet, Stone," Reed said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that cut through the sound of the rising tide. "The Secretary's bird is still loitering at 10,000 feet. Tita, he knows the Rangers intervened, but he doesn't know how much we have. He's going to claim this was a rogue operation to protect national security." Maya looked at the drive, then at Shadow, who let out a low, tired huff. "He can claim whatever he wants. This data contains the logistics for the Kandahar raid. It has his digital signature on the authorization for the incidental disposal of my team. He didn't just order a hit. He sold us." The helicopter above suddenly changed its pitch. The rhythmic thump-thump grew louder, more aggressive. A voice crackled over Reed's tactical radio, a voice that made Maya's blood turn to ice. It was the Secretary of Defense, his tone calm, paternal, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Captain Reed, you are interfering with a sensitive counterintelligence recovery. Stand down and hand over the assets, or I will be forced to authorize an immediate kinetic strike on that cave. We will label it a tragic accident caused by the storm." Liam gasped, his face draining of color. "A kinetic strike? He's going to bomb his own people just to get this drive?" "He's desperate, Liam," Maya said, her voice hardening. She stood up, ignoring the searing pain in her side where the shrapnel had torn through. She looked at Reed. "He's not going to wait for the Rangers to extract us. If he loses that drive, his life is over. He'd rather bury us all." Reed checked his watch. "The extraction birds are 2 minutes out. We have to move into the deep tunnels. The limestone is thick enough to shield us from a localized strike, but we have to leave the boat." They scrambled off the smuggling vessel just as a high-pitched whistle tore through the air. The first missile hit the entrance of the grotto, the explosion rocking the entire cliffside. Rocks rained down like lethal hail. Maya shoved Liam forward, her body shielding Shadow as they dove into the narrow secondary tunnel. The heat from the blast was a physical blow, a scorching wave that singed the hair on her neck. "Keep moving!" Maya roared over the secondary collapses. They reached a cathedral-like chamber deep within the rock. Shadow stopped, his ears swiveling toward the ceiling. He wasn't looking for missiles. He was looking for men. Maya followed his gaze and saw the green glow of night vision goggles. The Secretary hadn't just sent missiles. He'd sent a Halo jump team from a separate Black Ops unit. They were dropping through the vertical vents. "They're inside!" Maya shouted, raising her rifle. The chamber erupted into a chaotic, close-quarters firefight. Muzzle flashes strobed against the damp walls, turning the darkness into a nightmare of silhouettes and screams. Maya moved with the fluid, lethal grace of a woman who had finally found the target responsible for her ghosts. She picked off 2 attackers as they hit the floor, then pivoted to cover Liam. "The drive, Liam! Give it to Shadow!" "What? Why?" "They're targeting us. They won't expect the dog to have it. If we fall, he has to get out." Liam didn't argue. He tucked the micro SD card into the hidden compartment of Shadow's collar, the same place where this entire journey had begun. Shadow looked at Maya, his intelligent eyes filled with a terrifyingly human understanding. He didn't run. He stood his ground, a low, vibrating growl echoing in his chest. The major twist hit when the lead attacker stepped into a shaft of moonlight. He removed his helmet, revealing a face Maya hadn't seen in years. Her own brother, Caleb, whom she believed had died in a separate operation a decade ago. Caleb? Maya's voice was a whisper of pure, unadulterated shock. Her rifle dipped. "Go home, Maya," Caleb said, his voice cold and mechanical. "You were never supposed to survive Kandahar. You were the only variable we couldn't account for." "We? You're working for the men who killed my team? Huck your own blood?" "I'm working for the stability of this country," Caleb replied, leveling his weapon. "The secretary is the only one keeping the walls up. That drive is a wrecking ball we can't allow to swing." The betrayal was the final crushing blow. The war hadn't just followed her home, it had been born in her own house. Maya felt a coldness settle over her heart that was deeper than any blizzard. She didn't lower her weapon. She didn't cry. She looked at the brother she had mourned and saw only another target. "Then you're just another wall that needs to come down," Maya said. She fired, but she didn't fire at Caleb. She fired at the overhead limestone stalactite hanging directly above his position. The massive rock spire shattered, crashing down and creating a wall of debris that separated the two siblings. In the confusion, Maya grabbed Shadow and Liam, pushing them toward the final exit, a narrow crevice that led to the top of the cliff. "Reed, cover the rear. Go, Stone! I've got the Rangers coming up the back way." Maya scrambled up the jagged chimney of rock, her fingers bleeding, her lungs screaming. She reached the top and burst out into the freezing Maine night. The storm had finally broken, leaving a world of silver moonlight and lethal silence. The Jayhawk was hovering just 100 yards away, its side door open. The secretary himself visible at the edge of the airframe, holding a thermal designator. "He's painting us for a strike!" Liam yelled, pointing at the red laser dancing on Maya's chest. Maya looked at Shadow. The dog was staring at the helicopter, his hackles raised. She realized then that they couldn't run. The only way to stop the laser was to stop the man holding it. She grabbed the flare gun she had snatched from the boat, its single magnesium round still chambered. "Liam, hold the dog," Maya commanded. "Maya, what are you doing?" "I'm finishing the mission." She stood tall on the edge of the cliff, a silhouette of defiance against the Atlantic. She didn't aim for the secretary. She aimed for the open fuel intake of the Jayhawk, a vulnerability she knew by heart from her years of tactical training. She pulled the trigger. The magnesium flare streaked through the night like a falling star. It disappeared into the turbine intake. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, the helicopter erupted in a spectacular secondary explosion. The airframe buckled, the rotors shearing off as the machine transformed into a fireball that plummeted into the ocean below. The secretary, the conspiracy, and the ghosts of Kandahar all disappeared into the black water in a single, violent instant. Maya collapsed into the snow, the adrenaline finally leaving her body in a crushing wave of exhaustion. Shadow moved to her side, licking the salt and blood from her face. Liam sat down next to them, the silence of the night finally feeling like peace instead of a threat. "Is it over?" Liam whispered, looking at the burning wreckage on the waves. "It's over," Maya said, her voice steady for the first time in years. She reached out and touched Shadow's collar, feeling the hard shape of the drive. The truth was safe. Her team was avenged, and the brother she had lost and found only to lose again was a ghost she could finally stop chasing. She looked at the horizon, where the first faint light of dawn was beginning to bleed through the dark. "Where do we go now?" Liam asked. Maya stood up, her hand resting on Shadow's head. She didn't look back at the lighthouse or the cave. She looked toward the road, toward the future she had fought so hard to reclaim. She wasn't a seal anymore, and she wasn't a victim. She was a woman who had walked through the fire and come out the other side with her soul intact. "We go home," Maya said. She walked away from the cliffside, her steps firm in the fresh snow, her partner walking faithfully at her side. The war was over. The killer was exposed. And as the sun finally broke over the Atlantic, Maya Stone realized that the greatest victory wasn't surviving the storm, but choosing to remain human in the aftermath. The truth was no longer a burden to be carried, but a light that would guide them toward a life where the only thing they had to fear was the silence of a world that had finally found its justice. Maya Stone had saved the agent and exposed the killer, but in the end, her K9 had given her back the one thing the military had tried to take: her own heartbeat.